It is a pleasure to stand here tonight. I believe that in addition to the introduction, we are also presenting our speaker a plaque, is it?
Yeah.
Yeah. Do we have it?
Do we have it?
I just heard from this
Well,
charming
it's
lady on
disappeared.
my
I think he's in the process of getting it.
right who gave a talk one time on the sin of forgetfulness. I'm glad we don't have to call on her tonight to give another talk. Thank you. I think a little anecdote that I picked up about Judge Van Voorhis, it might be slightly apocryphal because the person who told me this has a delightful sense of humor. But it seems that shortly after he was appointed to his position as a member of the Court of Appeals, there was some discussion about license plates. And of course, our jurists do get special license plates. I believe they read JCA and then have a number. And I guess the chief gets one and so on down, the matter of seniority. It seems that there had been a slip up at the prison or somewhere, and that Judge Van Voorhis didn't receive a plate. And somebody else who didn't was complaining about it one time, and Judge Van Voorhis said, well, I don't have any trouble. I've had no trouble with police or anything in that regard. And they said, well, how come if you don't have a special plate? And he said, well, they always recognize me because I always have on my robes when I'm driving. Slightly apocryphal. I think before I do introduce our honored guest, I would like to read this citation to you. Maybe I better get these glasses on. The 1968 citation of the Irondequoit Historical Society is made to a native son of Irondequoit, Judge John Van Voorhis, for his service to the town of Irondequoit, not only as its attorney for many years, but also as a wise counselor at a period when this guidance was of decisive value. For his services over more than a quarter of a century as a justice of the Supreme Court of this state, for his achievements as an associate judge of the New York State Court of Appeals, the highest judiciary honor within the power of the people of this state. This citation is an annual citation, and with it goes what we in this society fondly think of as our number one tribute, and that is that we feel this goes to Irondequoit's number one citizen of the year. It is with considerable pleasure, sir, that on behalf of this society, I present you this citation.
Thank you very much. Mr. Grant, President Kostich, Maud West, wherever McGregor sits as the head of the table at the historical function, and members of the Irondequoit Historical Society. I'm very pleased to be asked to a return engagement before this group. Most of the places where I go to speak, I don't get invited back again. And this is particularly gracious to be here on a return engagement and to receive this very handsome and albeit unduly flattering citation, which I greatly appreciate and shall always treasure. It's quite a town. I was interested a few minutes ago when George Kostich said that his ancestor arrived here from Switzerland in the year 1830. Is that correct? 4 years before the village of Rochesterville became an incorporated city. There have been a lot of changes here. I don't think I can remember much before the age of 3. But I can remember a good many things since. And I was 3 years old at the exact turn of the century. I remember, as I guess I mentioned, I always loved to refer to our neighbor Thomas, whose name was given to Thomas Avenue. I think he had something to do with it. Before it was named Thomas Avenue, it was named River Road. And then I think it was really called, although you don't see the name on the maps, Smuggler's Road. And the old ice house, that is, it was used as an ice house after the time that Father bought the place, bore occasional indications of having been used for the storage of various illicit contraband importations. And so at any rate, we became respectable when neighbor Thomas caused it to be named Thomas Avenue. I don't know how many of you remember him. He was a very vivid character. He retired from the 7 seas, for he sailed Raja's ships built at his yard on the Genesee River around the world. But he retired from the sea, I think, somewhere around 1870 or thereabouts. And this great, tall, strapping figure of a man. And he married may we say, a mousy little woman, very retiring, and settled down on the farm there. They had 2 daughters, and I'm sure David Thomas saw to it that neither one of them ever looked at a man. And they were awful good neighbors, though. And they used to go out and do the farming. I can remember Mabel and Ella, particularly Ella, driving a team of horses on a hay rake. They don't use hay rakes anymore, but it was quite a hazardous thing. If you didn't look out, you'd fall off that seat and get raked up with the hay. But it was always managed. And then there was Charles Salmon. Oh, I always remember this. Salmon owned the land down around Somerville, a good deal of it, White City and so on. He bought early there. He came over from somewhere near Birmingham, I think, England. And he got out because they had so many strikes there in those days. He said they never introduced a new piece of textile machinery around Birmingham that there wasn't a strike, and so he came over to Irondequoit. Well, he, after a while, started to sell lots, and so did Thomas. And Thomas was always, he wanted to know all about everybody else's affairs, but he was very close-mouthed about his own. And I remember somebody had, I don't know, this dialogue was apocryphal, like my robes. But they were walking along together, so it went, and Thomas said to Salmon, "See, by the Daily Record, you sold another lot the other day." "Yes," said Salmon. "Salmon, I see by the Daily Record that you sold another lot the other day." "Yes," said Thomas. "How much did you get for your lot?" said Thomas. $600, said Salmon. "How much did you get for your lot?" said Salmon. "The deed said $1 and other good and valuable consideration." Well, I got to thinking of the names of the early settlers of the town that have been given to roads. Of course, there's Thomas Avenue. There's Titus Avenue. There's List Avenue. There's, now let me see. Let's think of as many of them as we can. Who can think of more?
Cole Road.
Cole Road.
Cooper Road.
Cooper Road, of course.
Garden Street.
Garden Street. Garden Street. So you can... Can't we turn this off? I don't. some of the others.
Armstrong Avenue.
Armstrong Avenue, Simpson Road, Rogers Parkway, Dake, Hurt Avenue,
Culver.
Culver, that's right.
Hudson was one of the early streets.
Was Hudson. Maud says Hudson was one of the early streets. Dake Road, Brower. Well, we could go on this way quite a while. Pardee, that's right. And, well, it's kind no, that was later. That came later. But it's quite interesting. It gives a kind of a brief history or resume. Well, how about Evershed? Wasn't there Evershed Road? Yeah, that's right. I almost forgot it. I can remember Evershed, the name, of course, Bill Evershed was on the town board when I first became town attorney, but I was thinking of the Evershed who ran the J.D. Scott. Which Evershed was it?
Frank Evershed had the lookout.
Frank had the lookout. Didn't he have the J.D. Scott?
I think he did.
It was the lookout. All right.
Broderick Drive.
Yes, that's right.
Perrin Street.
Perrin. That's right. Well, I always remember the J.D. Scott, the lookout. Are you sure that wasn't the J.D. Scott?
J.D. Scott. That wasn't on the bay, it was on the lake.
I guess I'm right. Well, it's like who wrote Benjamin Franklin's autobiography. She said J.D. Scott ran his own boat.
Kings Highway.
And that's right, Kings Highway. Used to be the Hogbag. Maud said that her book had been, I won't say criticized, but commented on, her history of the town, because it didn't make any reference to the politics of the town. And I told her that in some ways that was probably a virtue, but that in other ways it did leave out quite a lot of things that were interesting. And I thought that in the few moments that I have with you tonight, by that I have with you, I have as long as you want, but I don't want to overdo it, that I talk a little bit about my own recollections of politics in the town mostly from the time that Tom Broderick was first elected as supervisor in 1927 until for the next 10 years or so. The town had a population when I was born at the turn of the century of about 2,000, I think. It may have been 2,500, but it wasn't any more than that. Mainly market gardeners and other prosperous farmers. We had the Irondequoit surprise melon, you may remember. It went all over, it was known all over the country. I guess it was known outside of the country too. I think I saw some reference to it, some old reference to it not long ago in some other country, I forget which. Many other things. Well, that were grown here. And there were only 2 voting places, as I recall, when I got to remembering things at the age of 3. One was the Forest House, though I didn't hang out.
Mind talking a little louder.
One was the Forest House, though I didn't hang out there very much then. And another was Schutzen Park. And I always remember when Father'd go to vote, seemed like quite an event. We'd drive the horses up to Schutzen Park, and he'd vote. It was quite a long way from home. Sometimes stop at the blacksmith shop on the way up. That was Thompson, was it? The blacksmith shop?
Oh, the one over on the ridge?
No, on Hudson Avenue.
Or somebody on
Thompson, I think.
I don't know.
And the wonderful thing to see the skill when you were a little kid, to see the way he made those horses stand around. I never could have picked up one of their hooves like that and treated them as though they were just a little tame animal. And then time went on, and there got to be more districts in the town, and there was the 4th election district. And the 4th election district, as it was called then, was where Tom started in with his little store, and gradually got to be known. Of course, the election of 1927 was a very exciting time. By this time, there were about 15,000 people, I think, in the town. And there was a big fight over the real estate improvements, and there was a fellow named Grafton Johnson who came into the town from elsewhere. And of course, by this time, a lot of people had moved out from the city, and they didn't always understand the problems and the virtues of the earlier settlers here, and the vice versa, the other way around. And in order to the town to operate, it was necessary to reconcile interests of the farmers and market gardeners and the subdivision settlers from the city, which weren't always uniform. And there were a great many lands that were vacant. I'll tell you how Johnson did it. It was quite interesting. He was a man who, his lawyer told me, had owned land in every state in the country east of the Mississippi, and who seemed to get most of his satisfaction out of life out of getting himself into hot water and then getting out of it again. And what he'd do is to form a corporation. I think it was known as Lakeshore Acres, INC. And Lakeshore Acres had enough money to buy for the cash payment in buying the properties, but not enough to pay the mortgages, which were the principal amount of the purchase price. And Lakeshore Acres gave the mortgages, but Johnson was very careful to see that nobody assumed them. And so then Lakeshore Acres Incorporated, under the new statutes, would petition for the formation of improvement districts. And so about a good many $1 million, it seemed like that then. Now, of course, it's peanuts. But the town owed, I think, about $8 million, and it only had about $18 million of assessed valuation. And the money that was owed was not for improvements throughout the town, but in particular districts and locations. So Johnson would have this corporation, which was pretty much of a dummy corporation, didn't have much of any assets except enough to pay for the down payment, and it would give the mortgage, and then the town, in this way, would improve the property, and this was the way it went. Well, might have been all right if the Depression hadn't come along, which was the real estate depression. The real estate depression came a little ahead of the market collapse of 1929. And Johnson found himself in the situation where he couldn't sell the lots fast enough to pay off the obligations. And this really did make a mishmash. Fortunately, the improvements, many of which went into vacant properties in anticipation of the sale of lots, fortunately, the improvements seem to be pretty well built, and they've lasted a long time. And I suppose it would have cost a lot more money to build them today. But at any rate, the question was what to do about those that $8 million of floating debt. It wasn't even funded. Supposed to be collected any day. And a lot of people all over the town, way down distant places from the improved sections, would be called upon to pay for it. Well, Broderick got elected at that time, and largely because of that, those problems that had come before. And after that, it was necessary to pay off the debt. And they had to issue bonds, and then every year the money would come due against the lots, which hadn't shown up on the abstracts of title when they bought the property because the statutes were kind of drawn that way. And so every year the Democrats would come along with a statement that just look at the amount of taxes you got to pay. Now, the Republicans are in power here. Of course, the Republicans were in power when the money was borrowed. It wasn't Broderick administration. And they'd say, look at the big taxes you got to pay. So then we'd have to get together, I was town attorney then, and try to explain why the amount of taxes had to be so large, and just sweat it out for the next 15 years and everything will be all right. Of course, I'm not talking politics here tonight. In discussing politics, I'm just trying to give a little bit of a historical resume. I'm not, you can't talk about politics any more than you can about religion without making somebody mad, as a rule. And I have no intention of doing that. I'm only trying to recount some of the things that happened. And Maud West has this scrapbook, of Broderick's scrapbook of his 22 years as supervisor, and I found this little sheet here called the Irondequoit News. Well, I don't think this was really qualified as a newspaper, but we had to have something, and I was the editor of it. Here it is, Saturday, October 31st, 1931. And here's a list what Broderick saved the taxpayers. But we had to fight like anything to combat that easy argument about look at those big taxes you got to pay for the next 15 years. So this was some of it. Here's a repaving and widening of Culver Road. And this was done at the city's expense because Judge Cunningham, when he was corporation counsel of the city years before, had rendered an opinion that the city couldn't have Durand Eastman Park unless it was contiguous to it, and so the city owned the title to Culver Road all the way down to Durand Eastman Park, and if the city owned the title to it, we said then the city's got to pay for improving it, and that's what happened. Another interesting time was over the St. Paul Boulevard. You may remember the famous Cole-Provia hot asphalt dispute. Well, Tom was a pretty shrewd fella. He knew that the hot asphalt contractors' bids were usually pretty much alike. And there was an outfit from I think it was Cleveland, Ohio, known as the Cole-Provia Company. They had some kind of a new variety of pavement, and nobody could accuse them of being in league with the hot asphalt people. So Tom, with his Democratic town engineer named Tom Morrison, Tom got a hold of these people and invited them in to get them to submit bids. So we drew up the specifications so that the Cole-Provia people could bid and the hot asphalt people could bid. And so they bid against each other. And there was a tremendous mass meeting called by the hot asphalt people, and it was in the Masonic Temple, I think. And the Colprovia people came on. The hot asphalt people told about how it wouldn't last any length of time. It was just fatal to put in Colprovia as a pavement. It was ridiculous. And the Colprovia people got Carl Nixon down, I remember. And Carl was quite a young man then. He got up and made quite a speech. And the thing was a kind of a standoff after the meeting was over. But the Colprovia bids were received just the same, along with the hot asphalt bids. And the Colprovia people won down to Dake's Corners. That was the first contract to be let down that far, not the whole way. So then when they advertised for bids from Dake's Corners on down to Somerville, the hot asphalt people got together and they really sharpened their pencils and said, we got to drive these people out of here. And so they got low bid, and so it was hot asphalt from Dake's Corners down and Colprovia south, and I'm sure that competition saved the county and the town at least $100,000 on the payment of it, and that was more money then even than it is today. I see a little article here, How the Town Attorney is Paid. I think I wrote that article too. Out of his salary, he pays his own overhead expenses, which amount to $3,000 a year for the town's share of his office rent, clerks, stenographers. His office folders of town stenographic work are about 8 feet thick. Telephone, electricity, and office supplies. I was putting the best face I could on it. And, well, so many things are interesting. This building we're in, you may remember, Broderick never saw it. He had been stricken with the cancer that eventually carried him off by then. But he knew very well that voters don't like to vote money for quarters for public officials. And for years we carried on in the upstairs rooms there on the Ridge Road, and the floor was so creaky that when you'd have a big mass meeting there, and believe me, they did turn out some of those meetings, why, everybody was worried for fear the floor would collapse and it'd go on down through. But Tom wasn't going to spend any more money on office buildings than had to be, because he knows how taxpayers love to pay money to provide fancy quarters for their public officials. So for about 10 years, he was supervisor for 22 years altogether, the longest time of anybody in the history of the town, I think. And 10 years after they went on the budget system, he would estimate high on the expenses and a little bit low on the revenue. And then he'd tuck a few dollars away in the bank in his own name as supervisor, not personally. And this went on for at least 10 years. And by this time, there was $500,000 accumulated in that account. And his good friend, Frank Moore, who was the state controller and who was supposed to have audited these accounts every year, almost went crazy when Tom came out with a public announcement that we were going to have a new town hall. It was going to cost $500, and he had the money belonging to the town all in the bank. And no bonds were going to be issued for it, and no no other money spent, no regular money spent for it. Well, Frank Morris had a conniption fit. Why didn't I discover that, he said. He said he was honest and he put it in the name of the town, but if he hadn't been, look what could have happened. Well, anyway, that's the way this building got built. And it had the great advantage, the people did, of having Howard Patterson in charge of the planning and the general management of it. Howard was himself an engineer, an indefatigable worker, and a member, of course, for 20 years of the town board, nearly 20, I think it was 20. And Howard saw to it that the building was put up and the town got every nickel's worth of the $500,000, and that's what it cost. Imagine what it would have cost to have built this building today. But there never was a dime that went into the tax levies, tax rolls, for the construction of this building. Oh, there were so many things that happened. I can remember the Grafton Johnson lawsuit very well. Oh, before I leave the St. Paul Boulevard with the hot and cold asphalt, you probably remember when the sodium lights were put down. Well, this was quite a stroke. This was done entirely at the expense of the county. And in fact, the county paid for 30 feet out of the 40 feet of the pavement itself. The budding owners paid for the underground work and the other 5 feet on each side. The county paid for the sodium lights. Well, at that time, these sodium lights existed nowhere else, I think, except on the Golden Gate Bridge at San Francisco. And they shed a kind of golden light, and they penetrated pretty well through the fog. And that's probably why they had them out in San Francisco, where they have so much fog. And they didn't blind your eyes, and they were pretty good. And I can very well remember riding in the parade which commemorated the opening of those lights on the boulevard. Well, you knew it was going to be a failure from the first, because there was something about the quality of those lights that showed the women's makeup. And now in daylight or in ordinary light such as this, I wouldn't presume to say who has on makeup or who doesn't or how much or what it is. Maud has quite a little on, I think. But under those sodium lights, you knew just exactly. And so when finally they were superseded, why, I could understand why it was that they put in the white lights instead of the others. Only except the other lights for every other purpose had the advantage. But you know, the cosmeticians, you can't beat them. They really have got into the driver's seat. Well, I found today a number of pictures here, and to me they're perfectly delightful. There were some of them are given to me by Mrs. Myron Strickland, Mildred Strickland, and the rest, more numerous, are in this beautiful album which was kept by Maud West, covering the 22 years of Roderick's supervisorship. I suppose you probably can't see them here. It's astonishing to look how young some of these people are. Here's The only fellow that looks as though he was really of mature age is Joe O'Brien and Frank Gannett. Alan Valentine looks like a mere youngster, so does Herbert Eisenhart. And Judy Weiss, there's an article here, November 5th, 1941. Oh, we must go back to that. Here's 1931 as the first item. That's this Irondequoit News I spoke of. Here's an article that Maud put away by Arch Merrill in 1939. That was 12 years after Tom was elected supervisor, and it was about 6 years after, not quite 6 years, after he'd been made county chairman. And Arch Merrill does his usual delightful job and thorough. He said here, in the cold gray dawn of the morning after Election Day of 1933, a little band of dismayed and disheartened Republicans gathered like the old guard of Napoleon after Waterloo to survey the wreckage of a once invincible machine. And then he goes on to tell about how under Broderick's leadership it had been restored. And here's a picture where here is Johnny Keenan. How in the world he ever was chairman of the school board of the city of Rochester when he doesn't look over 18 years old? It's hard to figure out. And Henry D. Shedd with jet black hair. Jim O'Connor before he took off so much of his weight. And time went on, and at first Tom Dewey, who came in, I think he ran for governor in 1938, first time. I remember when he was running for president the second time, he said everything that he'd ever had that amounted to anything, he'd had to try for twice, including Mrs. Dewey. And only he didn't quite make it the second time with the presidency. Here's a headline: Dewey pays second nickel. Under Happy Birthday, Mr. Broderick. Picture of him cutting the birthday cake. Chicago. Monroe County Republican Chairman Thomas C. Broderick last night won his second nickel from presidential candidate Thomas C. Dewey. At a reception, he reminded the New York governor of a wager that he would be nominated on Broderick's birthday, that Dewey would. The birthday was Wednesday, which was Dewey Day to the Republicans at the Chicago National Convention. Dewey fished out a dime and passed it to Broderick. "Now you owe me a nickel," said the Republican standard bearer. Broderick won an earlier 5-cent bet when he wagered with the governor that he'd be elected chief executive of New York State. At that time, Dewey gave Broderick a check for the nickel. Some of these pictures you might like to look at afterward. They bring back a good many recollections. Here's one of Alf Landon, sure of victory. Certain Republican victory in 1940. Well, he was then campaigning for Dewey, 44. Some of the names here I'll mention before passing on to something else. Here's a 1937 election. Here is Earl Partridge, Edward A. Springer, candidate for councilman, Broderick supervisor, Fred Miller, candidate for councilman, William F. Widman, candidate for receiver of taxes, Allison M. Van Horn, candidate for school director. And here's a picture of Broderick all dressed up as a bus driver. This was 1939. Here dons the driver's cap as he sits at the controls of a new bus which replaced trolleys on the Somerville line early Tuesday morning. Shortly before, he and the other town officials, together with the Irondequoit Centennial Committee and transit officers, rode the trolley down St. Paul Boulevard on its final run. Here's George Henderson's picture, Howard Patterson, Walter Lauterbach. Here's all about the dedication of the new town hall. The Lochte episode, with a picture of Broderick again operating the same port in a storm. With the good ship Monroe County GOP taking over for the second time. Here's some interesting statistics. See if I can find them here. 35,000 persons attended, 15,000 bags of popcorn, 800 pounds of roasted peanuts, 100 gallons of ice cream, 14,500 Red Hots, 5,000 all-day suckers, 11,000 glasses of soft drinks. That briefly describes the number of persons at the Tom Broderick Day in Seabreeze Park last Sunday and the quantity of food, sweets, and soft drinks consumed. Here's a ticket which Maud West has put in here of the thing. And so it goes. Well, finally, here we have the Broderick dinner, not finally, in 1942, attended by Jim Wadsworth, Joe O'Brien, Hanley, others. Wadsworth, veteran legislator from Geneseo, hailed Broderick as a loyal personal friend, a man of integrity and courage. And I remember his saying one time that Broderick could say yes and no faster than any other man he ever knew and then stick to it. And the state chairmanship of the State Republican Committee was readily within his grasp at one time, but he said no, absolutely not. He wasn't going to lose his local contacts nor his local touch. And he certainly maintained those, and he really did fulfill the prescription of Rudyard Kipling. If you can walk with the crowds nor lose your virtue, walk with kings nor lose the common touch. Finally, there's a picture here of the casket. Tom Dewey there sat at the little chair in the little modest home that Tom always had. He loved and enjoyed and appreciated using well political power. He was a about the least mercenary person I think I've ever known. He wanted to have, he knew what it had been to be poor. I'm not sure that he had ever had completed a high school education. I know he'd never been to college. By the time that he died, I would say that his vocabulary was at least double that of the average college graduate. He had so many ideas he had to find words to put them into. And Earl Partridge helped him a good deal in that. Earl taught Greek, and Latin, and he knew what word Tom wanted, and when Tom would get the word, he'd play with it like a new, I won't say toy, but like a new treasure, a possession. And if he occasionally said, if he got his grammar mixed up once in a while and said them people or he don't or something like that, that didn't mean a thing. Here's Frank Moore. Bearers included Myron Strickland, Harold Bircher, Carl Hallower, Frank Moore, myself, and Carl Harvey. And the state chairman was there, Pfeiffer and Governor Dewey and Mrs. Weiss, Gannett Parrish. And so ended in 1949, on the 1st of October, a very remarkable career, or perhaps I should say the career of a very remarkable person. They don't come that way very often. I think I've told you before, reminded you because you remember. Many of you probably remember him quite as well as I do. But after he'd been bedridden for nearly 3/4 of a year anyway, half a year, he agreed to run again for supervisor to avoid a fight in the party in the town. Of course, he didn't actually live out his term, let alone being able to run for another term. But he was going to do it. I think I told you, but perhaps you'll bear with me if I repeat it. He said it was more trouble, all these things, responsibilities he had to discharge and get straightened out before he died. I remember one time he said with a kind of a gallant, light way, it's more trouble dying than it is being born. His estate would have been was entitled under the law as it then was, to a good deal more by way of the state's contribution to his retirement allowance if you resigned 30 days before you gave notice 30 days before you died. This was a quirk in the law. Well, of course, he couldn't resign very well if he was going to run again for supervisor to avoid a fight in the town. And so what he would do would give a 30 days notice. You have to resign before the 30 days expired. Then if his doctor thought he could live another 30 days, he would withdraw that notice before the 30 days was up and then give another 30-day notice. This was perfectly legal. It was exactly in conformity with the statute. Finally, the doctor, we had a little conference every time the 30 days was about up. The doctor said, I don't think he'll live another 30 days. And he said, do you think I should tell him? And I said, yes, I think you should. And he did. And it was quite a blow to Tom. He knew he was sick. But it's something to be told that you're not going to live another 30 days. Well, This 30-day period expired September 30, 1949. And on the 30th of September, I wrote out his resignation and gave it to Alice Fetter, his loyal, longtime secretary. She took it down, got him to sign it, acknowledged it, and it was filed at 3 o'clock in the afternoon in the town clerk's office. That night he was pretty bad. The doctor was in attendance, was giving him medication to keep him going at least until midnight, which it had to be to end that 30-day period. They thought he was in a coma. The clock struck midnight. Heard a voice come from the bed, said, "I made it." Well, thank you very much for your courtesies, inviting me back, and the pleasure of talking here. And I hope sometime you'll ask me to come back again. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for your wonderful talk, Judge. And I'm sure someday we will have you back again. Well, since we have no further business for this evening, I guess we stand adjourned.